The elevator was too quiet for her liking. It hummed softly, that low mechanical groan of a building too expensive to make a noise but too old to hide its bones. Thalia Muir shifted her weight from foot to foot, trying not to look as nervous as she felt. Her white blouse, now stained with the arc of a caramel latte, clung to her skin unpleasantly. She had spilled it not 15 minutes ago, right before she entered the building, and now she was riding up to the 32nd floor for a freelance meeting, looking like she had just wrestled with a cappuccino machine. To make matters worse, her sweater was crammed deep inside her backpack, and her fingers, slick with the remnants of sticky syrup and nerves, were struggling to unzip it. There was only one other person in the elevator, a tall man in a tailored charcoal gray suit, so sharply pressed it could have been cut from stone. He hadn't looked at her once, though she'd noticed him the second she stepped in. He was hard to miss. Broad shoulders, perfectly still posture, and the kind of stillness people associated with power. His jaw was clean-shaven, his dark hair swept back with a meticulous precision, and everything about him screamed control. He radiated the type of energy that didn't tolerate inconvenience, which made what she was about to do feel about 10 times more mortifying. She cleared her throat quietly, still fidgeting with the zipper. The bag slipped a little from her shoulder. The stain on her blouse had started to feel cold. She realized she wasn't going to manage it on her own without causing a full-blown scene. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly, softly, half regretting it as soon as the words were out. "But would you mind helping me unzip this?" For the first time, he looked at her. Slowly. His eyes were a pale, startling gray, and for a heartbeat he didn't answer, didn't blink, didn't move. She saw the flicker of confusion on his face. Not disdain, not disgust, but sheer disbelief that someone had spoken to him like a human being, much less asked for help. He looked down at the bag she was holding, then at her hands, covered in light brown smears of coffee and her own embarrassment. After a long second, he nodded once, wordlessly, and stepped closer. His hands were large, long-fingered, with short nails. He took the bag by one strap, turned it slightly, and tugged at the zipper with an ease that made her cheeks flush hotter. It slid open instantly. "Thank you," she said, her voice thinner now, quieter. He handed the bag back, his fingers brushing hers, only slightly, and then stepped back into his original place. Still not a word. Thalia pulled out the sweater and did her best to wrangle it on over the coffee stain without flashing too much of herself. The elevator chimed. 32nd floor, a robotic voice announced. The doors opened, and he stepped out first. She expected him to walk off without a glance, like a storm passing by. But just before he turned the corner, he stopped, looked back, met her eyes again. "You're not here for a job interview, are you?" he asked, his voice low and precise, rich with a cadence that suggested he didn't speak often unless he meant to. She blinked. "No, just a client meeting. I do illustrations. Freelance work." He held her gaze for a moment longer, nodded once, and then disappeared around the corner. Thalia stepped off on the 33rd floor, her heart still hammering, sweater only half on, unsure if the heat in her face was from embarrassment or something far more strange. She didn't know his name. She hadn't seen his badge or caught the company logo on his suit. But there was something about him, something unfamiliar and magnetic. The kind of presence you couldn't explain but couldn't forget either. What she didn't know was that the man she had just asked to unzip her backpack was Caius Ellery, CEO of the very building she was in. A man who hadn't spoken to anyone in an elevator in over 3 years. A man whose life was structured to avoid randomness, emotion, and, most of all, vulnerability. And she had just disrupted all three with a single, accidental request. By the time Caius reached his private floor, he was still thinking about her. Not just the request, not just the coffee or the sweater, but her face. Open, unapologetically real in a world of forced smiles and curated perfection. He walked past his assistant without a word, entered his office, and, for the first time in months, closed the door behind him without making a call. Instead, he sat down at his desk, opened his laptop, and stared at the screen without seeing it. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, paused, then slowly reached for his phone. He didn't know her name, but he was going to find out, because something about her had slipped under the armor. Quietly, gently, like fingers brushing against his in an elevator, asking for nothing more than a moment of help. And now he couldn't stop wondering what it would feel like to give her more. The following morning, the city was wrapped in fog, a dense, shifting veil that softened the steel edges of downtown and gave everything a ghost-like stillness. The glass walls of the Knoxville Systems building reflected pale light and flickered with silhouettes as employees filtered into the lobby, their heads bowed to screens or braced against the cold. Caius Ellery sat in his office, but he wasn't working. His fingers hovered idly above the keyboard, not typing, not searching. He had opened and closed the same browser tab 3 times. The air smelled faintly of roasted coffee and the citrus polish used on the mahogany table that no one but him ever touched. His assistant had left a schedule on his desk, meetings with software developers, a legal call about intellectual property rights, and a briefing on the European rollout of their latest cloud platform. All urgent, all routine, all irrelevant. His thoughts weren't in the building. They weren't even in his own mind. They kept slipping back to the elevator, to the feeling of her fingers brushing against his, to the way she'd smiled through her discomfort, as if trying to apologize for her own existence. It wasn't attraction, at least not in the way he was used to identifying it. It was something else. Curiosity, maybe. Or the ache of familiarity when you see something for the first time and feel like you've known it all along. He stood up abruptly, the chair creaking as it rolled back. With a few swift taps on his phone, he sent a message to Isaac, his discreet personal aide, who handled inquiries that didn't fall under the purview of standard corporate channels. The message was simple. Find out who the freelance illustrator was on the 33rd floor yesterday, around 4:15 p.m. Short, dark hair, white blouse, denim jeans, latte stain. While waiting for a reply, he went to the wall of his office that doubled as a digital screen. With a voice command, he opened the building's guest log, skipping past the formal access logs and navigating to the temporary contractor check-ins for that floor. It took less than a minute. Thalia Muir. That was her name. He repeated it aloud under his breath. Soft vowels. Rhythmic. Almost lyrical. It fit. He clicked open her contractor profile. Just a simple digital sheet with her email, phone number, and service category. No photo. Just freelance, visual art, illustration. Client. Whitcomb PR Group. He sat back down, staring at her name. She wasn't part of his world, not by money, not by status, not by association. But something about her, the earnestness, the unaffected way she looked at him, the absence of fear, had gripped him harder than he was willing to admit. Meanwhile, 2 blocks away, Thalia was staring at her phone with a frown. She'd just left the cafe where she worked mornings for rent money, and now she was walking toward the co-op art space she rented once a week for sketching. Her sneakers splashed through a shallow puddle as she checked her inbox. A message had come in. Unknown sender. Miss Muir, we are reaching out on behalf of Mr. Caius Ellery, CEO of Knoxville Systems. He has expressed interest in discussing a potential private commission based on your recent work for Whitcomb PR. If you're available to meet this afternoon, please respond at your earliest convenience. Isaac R., Sheen, Personal Office of the CEO. She stopped walking, blinked, reread the message. Caius Ellery? She recognized the name. Of course she did. The reclusive tech billionaire. She'd passed his name on office doors, in articles her roommate forwarded. People described him as ruthless, brilliant, deeply private. What could he possibly want from her? Her first instinct was that it had to be a mistake. Then she remembered the elevator. Her cheeks flamed at the memory. Had he somehow tracked her down because of that embarrassing moment? That couldn't be it. Unless he had seen the sketch she'd left behind. The one of him. Thalia's heart began to race. Not with fear, but with a strange, flickering heat that started in her stomach and climbed to her throat. She responded with a cautious yes, and within the hour, a black car arrived to pick her up. The ride to Knoxville's upper executive level was silent. The elevator that carried her to the private floor was mirrored, and she caught her reflection as it rose. Fidgeting hands, biting her lip, clutching her portfolio like a shield. When the doors opened, she was greeted not by a receptionist, but by a man in a dark-tailored suit with warm eyes and an impassive face. Isaac. Miss Muir, he said smoothly. Mr. Ellery is waiting for you in the solarium. Solarium? She followed silently, passing glass walls, offices that looked more like art galleries, and rooms that buzzed softly with quiet, invisible power. The solarium was a high-ceilinged room filled with plants, filtered sunlight, and floor cushions arranged around a central low table. It felt more like a spa than a tech company. At the far end, standing by a vertical garden wall, was Caius Ellery. He turned as she entered, his expression unreadable. He wore no tie today, just a navy shirt with the sleeves rolled. Casual, but still precise. His eyes met hers, and again, that strange feeling surged through her. Recognition without history. You came, he said. Not as a question, just a quiet observation. I wasn't sure if the message was real, she replied honestly. It didn't seem like something that would happen to me. He studied her a moment, then motioned to the seat across from him. She sat carefully, setting her portfolio beside her. I saw your sketch, he said, the one you left at Whitcomb. Thalia's stomach dropped. I didn't mean to. It was a draft, just something quick. It wasn't quick, he said. It was precise. Painfully so. She met his gaze. I didn't draw it to be cruel. I didn't say it was cruel, he said, his voice quiet. Just accurate. The silence stretched between them like a wire. Not tense, not easy, just delicate. I want to offer you a commission, he said at last. A private one. I'd like you to draw something for me, but only if you're comfortable working directly with me. No agents, no intermediaries. Thalia frowned. What kind of commission? He paused. Then, I want you to draw me. Not the man people see. The man you saw. The one in the elevator. The one in your sketch. Her breath caught. Why? "Because I don't know who that is anymore," he said, "and I think you might." For a long time she didn't speak. She only stared at him. This man who had power at his fingertips, now asking to be seen. Not worshipped, not feared, just seen. She nodded. Slowly. "I'll do it." He gave her the smallest smile she'd ever seen, but it reached his eyes, and without another word, she pulled out her pencil. The pencil in Thalia's hand hovered just above the clean, ivory surface of her sketchpad. Her fingers tensed with a strange kind of restraint. Across from her, Caius Ellery sat on a low-backed chair near the solarium's window wall, bathed in a muted stream of gray morning light that filtered through hanging vines and wide, leafy branches. The atmosphere felt more like a greenhouse than a corporate suite. The warm scent of earth, the soft chirp of an automated water feature, the dappled shadows on the floor, all of it gave the illusion that they weren't perched in a tower of glass and steel, but inside something far older and more sacred. He didn't speak. He simply watched her, still and calm, his arms resting on the chair's curved arms, his posture perfect without looking rigid. She'd asked him to sit naturally, without pretense, but she wasn't sure if a man like Caius knew what that meant anymore. Still, there was something in the way his eyes followed her movements, in the slight arch of his brow when her pencil scratched lightly against the page, that made her think he was trying. Trying not just to sit still, but to be open. It wasn't the first time Thalia had drawn someone from life. She had sketched musicians in parks, baristas in stolen seconds during breaks, and once, a friend during chemo, while they both pretended the IV stand was just another piece of scenery. But this was different. Caius wasn't just a face or a form. He was a paradox in motion. Every angle of his body was trained, deliberate, composed. But the eyes betrayed him. There was a heaviness behind them, a sharp, clean pain. She drew without speaking for nearly 20 minutes. The pencil glided over the page, building a frame, shaping shadows, layering contours. She captured the fall of light over his cheekbone, the gentle downward turn of his mouth when he was thinking too hard, the subtle tension in the muscles of his neck. She didn't have to force anything. It was all already there. He was unknowingly telling her the story with his stillness. Eventually, he spoke, his voice low and even. "You don't look up when you draw." "I already saw what I needed to," she replied without pausing. He tilted his head slightly. "Most people look again. Measure. Adjust." "You're not most people," she said, a hint of dry amusement in her voice. "You don't change when you think someone's watching. You hold the same expression, same posture. It's like your body is locked in a performance you've rehearsed so long it's become muscle memory." His lips pressed together faintly, and for the first time since she'd entered, he looked away. Not at the plants. Not at her. Just into a corner of the room where no one was. "You talk to me like you know me," he said. "I don't," she admitted. "But I can see you. That's what drawing is. Not copying, not flattering, just seeing." He didn't answer right away, and when he did, it was quieter than before. "I used to think I had to become someone people couldn't see through. That the only way to lead, to control, was to be a wall they couldn't scale. But the longer I stayed behind that wall, the more I started forgetting who I was before I built it." Thalia looked up from her sketchpad then, her gaze meeting his. "Do you want to remember?" "Yes," he said, but I'm not sure I'll like what I find. She closed the pad gently, setting the pencil aside. Sometimes the things we don't like are the parts that make us worth something. There was a beat of silence, deep and unshaken. He leaned forward slightly, elbows now resting on his knees, gaze focused entirely on her. You didn't ask what I was going to do with the drawing. I figured you'd tell me if it mattered, she said. I want to keep it, he said. Not to display, not to show anyone, just for me. Thalia nodded. That's the best kind of portrait, one no one else needs to understand. He straightened again, but the tension in his shoulders had lessened. He looked not just relaxed, but present. I have a meeting in 20 minutes, he said, but I'd like you to stay. Use the space whenever you need to. Draw, think. Do whatever it is that people like you do when the rest of us are too busy pretending to be important. She smirked slightly. People like me? He tilted his head again, this time with something dangerously close to a smile. People who aren't afraid to feel things. She stood, gathering her sketch pad and sliding it back into her worn canvas bag. Careful, she said. You keep complimenting me, and I might start liking you. His eyes darkened for half a second, something unreadable crossing his face. Then, softly, you already do. She left without replying, but her fingers curled a little tighter around the strap of her bag as the elevator doors closed behind her. Back in the solarium, Caius didn't move. He sat there for several long minutes, watching the space where she had stood, feeling the warmth of her presence like a fading note of music. Then he looked down at the place where her hand had rested on the table while sketching. His own hand hovered over it for a moment, then slowly curled into a fist. He didn't know why he felt the way he did. He didn't understand the pull, the quiet ache that had begun to form somewhere beneath the years of practiced stillness. But he knew one thing. Thalia Muir had entered his life as a flicker of randomness, a girl who spilled coffee and needed help unzipping her bag. And now, somehow, she had unzipped something inside him too, something he wasn't sure he'd ever be able to close again. The next week unfolded like a slow and beautiful unraveling. Thalia returned to the solarium 3 times, each time at Caius's personal invitation, though his words never implied obligation. He was careful with her, careful in a way that felt deliberate, as if he were relearning how to speak to someone without the buffer of status or structure. They didn't always talk. Sometimes she drew while he worked quietly across the room. Other times they sipped tea from mismatched ceramic cups and let the silence stretch between them like a thread pulled taut. It was in those silences that something deeper began to form. There was no need to fill the space, no pressure, just presence. Caius had begun noticing things about her that no one else would have thought important. The way she hummed under her breath when she concentrated, the way she chewed on the end of her pencil when she was stuck, the way she would stare at a single leaf in the solarium, eyes distant, like she was somewhere far away, but never lost. She brought energy into his world, soft, sincere, and deeply unfiltered. He hadn't realized how much his life had grown sterile until she walked in and made it breathe again. It was on the 4th day, a Friday, that something shifted between them. Thalia had stayed longer than usual, caught up in the details of a new commission he'd asked for. Something symbolic, abstract, and haunting. He hadn't explained it in full, only said he wanted it to reflect a part of himself no one else sees. She didn't press him. She simply nodded, her sketchpad already in hand. But as the sun dipped low and shadows spilled into the corners of the solarium, she looked up from her page and found him staring. Not at the view or the plants, but at her. "You don't let anyone touch you," she said quietly, not accusing, just observing. His brow lifted. "That's quite a statement. It's just, every time I pass something to you, you hesitate. Every time I get too close, you lean away. Not obviously. Not enough to be rude, but enough for someone like me to notice." He didn't answer right away. He shifted in his chair, something unfamiliar tightening in his jaw. "You're not wrong," he finally said. "I spent a long time learning to keep people out. Touch became unnecessary, then uncomfortable, then something worse." Thalia set her pencil down slowly. "What happened?" He exhaled, long and controlled, as if deciding whether to open a door long sealed. "My younger brother Landon," he began, his voice thinner now. "He was brilliant, wild, the kind of person who made you believe life was limitless. He was also an addict. For years, I tried to fix him. Rehab, therapy, threats, silence, money. Nothing worked. And then one night, he overdosed. Alone. I hadn't called him in 2 weeks." Thalia's heart ached, and her first instinct was to move to him, to touch his hand, to offer some measure of comfort. But she didn't. She waited. "I found him," Caius continued, his voice rougher now. "In his apartment. I had the key. I was supposed to visit that week, but I pushed the meeting. Said I was too busy. When I found him, he was already cold." Thalia swallowed hard. "I'm so sorry." "I stopped letting people in after that," he said. "Not just emotionally, physically. I didn't want to feel anything that close ever again." There was a long pause. Then Thalia stood, moved slowly toward him. Not fast, not boldly, but with careful, intentional steps. When she reached his chair, she knelt in front of him, folding her legs under her, and looked up into his face. "I'm not trying to fix you," she said softly, "and I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. But you're allowed to feel again. That part of you isn't dead. It's just been waiting for someone safe." Her fingers hovered near his, open but not demanding. She didn't touch him. She only offered the option. For several seconds, he stared at her hand, unmoving. Then, slowly, deliberately, he lifted his own and placed it over hers. It was a simple gesture. But for Caius, it was everything. Her hand was warm, her palm smaller than his, but steady. She didn't tighten her grip or pull him closer. She let him decide what came next. When he finally looked back at her, his eyes were different, softer, raw. "I'm not sure how to do this," he murmured. "You don't have to know," she whispered. "You just have to be here." And he was. For the first time in years, he was fully there, in the room, in the moment, with someone who didn't ask him to lead, to protect, or to pretend. Someone who saw him, just as he was, and didn't flinch. That evening, as the lights dimmed in the solarium and the world outside turned to twilight, they sat side by side in silence. Their hands remained joined, resting between them on the bench like a quiet, unspoken promise. He didn't pull away, neither did she, and somewhere in the heart of the building he'd built to keep the world out, a door had quietly opened, and neither of them wanted to close it again. Sunday came wrapped in golden light, the kind that filters through glass and softens everything it touches. The city outside the windows of the Knoxville penthouse glowed like it had been freshly polished, the usual chaos dulled by the quiet peace of a late weekend morning. The solarium remained locked and unused, but it didn't matter. Caius and Thalia were somewhere else now, somewhere far more personal. She had agreed to meet him at the rooftop lounge above his private residence. He'd sent the invitation without flourish, just a text that said, "No sketching today, just company. Rooftop, noon." It was the first time he'd suggested something outside the frame of her work, the first time he'd wanted her there not as an artist, but as herself. He didn't know what he expected. Perhaps he thought she'd show up nervous, unsure, still trying to read him like one of her living portraits. But when she appeared, wearing jeans, a dark green linen shirt, her hair pulled up in a messy knot, and no makeup, she looked freer than he'd ever seen her. She carried no sketch pad, no agenda, only herself. When she stepped out onto the rooftop, she paused just for a moment to take it all in. The glass railing, the potted jasmine climbing along the far trellis, the wide, low couches around the fire pit, and the man standing near the edge, staring out at a horizon few people ever got to see. He turned when he heard her footsteps. Their eyes met, and for once neither of them looked away. "I brought nothing," she said. "I asked for nothing," he replied. They both smiled. He gestured to the table, where a small spread had been set out. Fruit, pastries, tea, and something that looked suspiciously like a dish he hadn't made himself. "I cooked the eggs," he said. "Everything else was ordered." She sat across from him, drawing her legs beneath her. "Did you ever think this would be your life?" she asked, pouring herself tea without waiting for permission. "A rooftop brunch with a stranger who once made you unzip her bag?" "I don't think I had a clear picture of what my life would be," he answered honestly. "But it definitely didn't include you." Her brow arched. "Gee, thanks. I don't mean that unkindly. I mean that I stopped imagining anything different. I thought I'd finish the blueprint." He reached for a slice of toast and broke it in half. "You wrecked the foundation." She bit into a piece of melon, chewing thoughtfully. "Well, you needed better architecture." There was laughter in his throat, warm and unforced. He was beginning to enjoy how easily she teased him, how she treated him like a man and not a myth. It made the air feel lighter. After they ate, he showed her the greenhouse pod on the other end of the rooftop. It was smaller than the solarium, more chaotic. Plants climbing in all directions, tangled vines, bright blooms. Thalia gasped softly as she stepped inside. "It's wild," she said. "Like you gave up trying to control this one." "I did," Caius said, leaning against the doorframe. This was Landon's. He used to come up here and plant something every time he felt something. Angry, happy, broken. It all went into the dirt. I kept it alive after he died, but I've never added anything. Thalia turned, her expression unreadable. "Do you ever want to?" "I didn't," he said, "but now I'm not sure." She stepped closer, placing a hand lightly on the frame of a tall pot that held a twisting wisteria vine. The scent was subtle but intoxicating. She traced one of the leaves with her fingertip. "You could plant something for today." He looked at her, really looked at her, and for a brief second he felt everything stop. The wind paused, the light seemed to shift, and something inside him, Some delicate mechanism long locked away clicked back into motion. "I wouldn't know what to plant," he said softly. She reached into her bag, pulled out a small folded square of paper, and handed it to him. Inside was a pressed flower. It wasn't from the rooftop, but from the park. A daisy, slightly faded, perfectly preserved. He stared at it for a long moment. "I found it on the day I met you," she said. "I pressed it because I was scared I'd forget how real that moment felt." He took it carefully, as if it were made of glass. His voice, when it came, was hoarse. "You remembered." "I never forgot." He held the flower over the nearest pot, one that was already teeming with life, and gently tucked it into the soil. It wasn't a seed. It wouldn't grow. But it marked something. A beginning. A choice. She watched him, and he turned toward her, closer now. His hands, always so cautious, found her hips, resting there like they had always belonged. She looked up, and there was nothing playful in her face now. Only breathless, patient knowing. "I've wanted to do this for longer than I should admit," he said. "Then stop waiting." And he kissed her. It was not a delicate kiss. It was slow but deep, built from weeks of restraint and confusion and wonder. His hands curled against the small of her back as hers slid up into his hair, and the kiss grew. More certain, more consuming. It wasn't about need. It was about recognition, about the crash of two lives that had never planned for this, never dared to imagine it, and yet somehow arrived here, on a rooftop above the world, lips pressed together, rewriting the rules. When they pulled apart, neither spoke. There was no need. Their foreheads rested against each other, breaths mingling, hearts thudding in tandem. "I don't know what this is," Caius murmured, "but I'm not letting it go." Thalia smiled, her voice barely audible. "Good, because I'm not letting you hide anymore." He nodded, a promise in the motion. Then, quietly, he led her back inside, fingers still laced with hers, and left the flower to rest where it had been planted, in the soil of a wild garden, grown not from control, but from the first bloom of something real. The next morning, Thalia woke in a bed she never thought she would see the inside of. Caius Ellery's. The room around her was surprisingly modest for someone of his wealth. There were no gold fixtures, no grandiose displays of opulence, just a large, dark wood bed with crisp, charcoal gray sheets, heavy blackout curtains now half drawn to allow a soft, golden light to peek through, and walls lined with shelves of books. Actual books, not digital placeholders. Most were well-worn, spines bent and annotated, filled with titles ranging from classic Russian literature to obscure botanical studies. It was a room of someone who lived more in his mind than in the world. A room not of a billionaire, but of a man who needed solitude like others needed oxygen. She sat up slowly, the sheet clutched around her bare chest. Her clothes were folded neatly on the armchair in the corner, and on the nightstand beside her rested a glass of water and a folded note. She reached for it, fingers trembling slightly, not out of fear, but something more electric, more unsure. The handwriting was clean, sharp, masculine. "I've gone to the gym downstairs. You can sleep in or explore. If you want breakfast, press the black button on the nightstand, and Oliver will bring something up. I'll be back in an hour. Don't vanish." "See," she smiled, running her fingers along the edge of the note. It was simple, practical, a little awkward, and entirely him. She stood, wrapped the soft hotel-quality robe that hung nearby around her body, and walked barefoot across the heated floor toward the window. The city sprawled beneath her, skyscrapers glinting in the soft morning sun, and she realized she was looking at the world from a height she'd never imagined occupying. And yet, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel like she didn't belong. When Caius returned, his hair damp from the shower and his shirt clinging to his frame, he found her in the kitchen barefoot, sipping coffee and reading the back of a tea box like it was a mystery novel. He paused in the doorway, unsure for a moment how to approach. He had spent so many years curating his solitude, perfecting the performance of untouchable control, and now here she was, unfiltered, soft, and absolutely real, in his kitchen. "You found the coffee," he said, voice still a little hoarse from the workout. She turned, smiling. "Barely. You have the most aggressively organized pantry I've ever seen. Did you label your dried oregano by year?" "Only if I'm proud of the harvest." They both laughed. The ease between them was startling, even to him. It wasn't flirtation. It was familiarity, a rhythm forming not from habit, but instinct. He moved to her, touched the small of her back, and kissed her gently on the temple. It wasn't a demand or a declaration. It was something quieter. A welcome. They ate breakfast at the small table by the window, eggs and sourdough toast with her humming a song under her breath while spreading jam. It felt alarmingly domestic, too peaceful, too natural. And for that very reason, Caius couldn't stop feeling the small buzz of panic under his ribs. He wasn't used to being seen like this, not even by himself. Midway through breakfast, Thalia noticed his silence. "You're thinking too loud," she said. He looked at her, startled, as if she'd caught him trying to sneak out of his own thoughts. "I keep waiting for the moment this starts feeling like a mistake." Her fork froze midair. "Is that what this feels like?" "No," he said quickly. "That's the problem. It feels like the opposite. Like it's not a mistake at all. And that terrifies me." Thalia set her fork down. "You don't have to prove anything, Caius. Not to me. Not to anyone. If you're scared, be scared. I'm scared too." He looked at her for a long moment. "What are you scared of?" "That you'll wake up one day and remember who you are," she said softly, "and decide I don't fit." He reached across the table, took her hand in his, and held it tightly. "Then I'll make who I am fit you." For a while, neither of them spoke. They just sat in the warm morning light, hands clasped between a half-eaten breakfast and a future neither of them had dared to hope for. Later that afternoon, they went back to the rooftop garden. She walked among the pots like a child exploring sacred ground, stopping every so often to smell a bloom or crouch to inspect something growing wild. He followed behind, not hovering, just present, watching, learning her through the way she moved in spaces not built for her, but now slowly becoming hers. She found the pot where he had buried the pressed flower she had given him. It was still there, tucked gently beneath the surface, like a promise whispered into the soil. "Can I plant something?" she asked suddenly. He nodded. "Anything." She reached into her tote and pulled out a small seed packet. Daisies. Simple, resilient. The kind of flower that never tried to be more than it was, and yet still brought light wherever it grew. They knelt together, hands brushing as they worked the soil. She pressed the seeds in gently, covered them with earth, and looked up at him. "You can't force them to grow," she said. You can only give them a place. He stared at her, and something in his chest unraveled, painfully and beautifully. I want to give you that, he said. She blinked, her hands still buried in the dirt. What? A place, he said. You don't have to stay. I'll never ask that of you. But if you want it, I want to make room for you. In my world. In my life. She didn't cry. Not then. But her lips trembled, and she leaned forward, pressing her forehead gently to his. You already have, she whispered. You just didn't realize it. And, as the sun dipped behind the skyline and the seeds of daisies lay hidden in the dark, rich soil, two people, once strangers in an elevator, sat in quiet communion, no longer afraid of the roots taking hold beneath. Them. The calm that had settled over Caius and Thalia's world didn't last. It never does. Not when the world they lived in ran on headlines, stock prices, and image control. What had begun in silence and sweetness was now on the edge of being devoured by noise. It started with a photograph. It was nothing scandalous. No dramatic kiss, no risque position. Just a simple image of Caius and Thalia walking side by side along the edge of the rooftop garden, her hand gently brushing against his as they passed by a cluster of sunflowers. His head was tilted slightly toward her, lips curled in what could only be described as the ghost of a smile. To an outsider, it may have looked like an affectionate moment between longtime lovers. But to the press, starved for any glimpse into the life of the reclusive CEO, it was a gold mine. The photo surfaced late Wednesday evening on a gossip blog known for its ruthless speculation. Within hours, it had been reposted, reshared, dissected, and monetized. By the next morning, headlines flooded every tech and business news feed. Knox Vale's billionaire CEO and the mystery woman in the garden. Caius Ellery breaks his silence with her. Who is the woman behind the CEO's smile? Thalia didn't know. Anything was wrong until she walked into the cafe she still worked at part-time, her attempt to hold on to normalcy, and found 3 different people on their phones, staring directly at her. One woman leaned over and whispered something to her friend, and they both looked up, not with malice, but curiosity. That somehow made it worse. By the time she got to the register, her manager was already waiting with a folded newspaper in his hand and an apologetic look on his face. I hate to do this, he said, but the owner saw the photo. She thinks your presence here might be distracting, not good for business. Thalia froze. I didn't even do anything. I know, but it's your face in every article. People are curious. It's disruptive. She nodded slowly, swallowing the rising burn in her throat. She didn't argue. She didn't beg. She just clocked out, walked outside, and stood in the cold morning air as her world shifted beneath her feet. By the time she returned to the penthouse, she already knew what the next problem would be. The press she could ignore. The job she could survive losing. But the board at Knox Vale? The investors? They were another matter entirely. When she opened the door, Caius was pacing the living room, his phone gripped tight in his hand. He looked up at her, face taut with barely concealed frustration. I'm sorry, he said immediately. I should have known it wouldn't stay quiet forever. She dropped her bag, toeing off her shoes with deliberate calm. They let me go. From the cafe. His jaw tightened. That's unacceptable. I'll make a call. Don't, she said sharply. That's exactly what they expect. That you'll fix it for me. That I'm just another project you're managing. He stopped moving. "You're not." "I know," she said, softer now. "But they don't. And they won't." He stepped toward her. "The board's already contacted me. They're concerned about appearances. There's talk of you being a conflict of interest." She laughed bitterly. "Of course I am. I always was. The moment you didn't look through me in that elevator." "I don't care what they think," he said, voice suddenly louder. "I built this company from the ground up. I kept it alive when no one believed in it. I've earned the right to have a life." "But at what cost?" she asked. "What happens if they push harder? If they force you to choose?" "I won't let them." "But they will," she said, "because that's what power does. It makes demands, and the world you live in, it doesn't make space for people like me." He looked at her then, truly looked, at the pain behind her eyes, at the calm she was using as a shield, at the way she was already pulling away even though she hadn't taken a step. "Don't do this," he whispered. "If I stay," she said, "they will make your life harder. Your credibility, your influence, everything you've built, it'll be questioned, undermined. You'll spend years cleaning up the mess." "I don't care about any of that." "You should," she said, "because I do." He reached for her hand, and for a moment she let him take it. His grip was firm, desperate, but her fingers trembled. "I love you," he said. "I didn't know it was possible, not after everything I closed off, but it is, and it's you. It's always been you." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but her voice stayed steady. "I love you too," she said, "and that's why I'm leaving, because I don't want to be the reason you lose what you've worked so hard for." She kissed him once, soft and final, and then stepped back, out of his reach, out of his arms. He didn't try to stop her again, because he knew. This wasn't a breakup, it was a sacrifice, one he couldn't ask her to make, and one she couldn't avoid. Later that night, he stood alone in the rooftop garden. The wind rustled through the plants. The pot where she had planted the daisies remained untouched, silent, the seeds buried beneath the soil, waiting. He knelt beside it, pressed his hand into the earth, and whispered her name, and for the first time in years, the man who had built his world out of silence let himself break. 3 weeks passed, not in the way time usually moves, with rhythm, with purpose, but in the jagged, uneven crawl that follows loss. For Caius Ellery, those days blurred together, colored not by board meetings or project launches, but by the absence of her. He went to work, answered calls, signed contracts, but it was mechanical, shallow, like breathing through water. The rooftop garden remained untouched. The daisies she had planted still just soil and silence. He visited them every morning before sunrise and every night after the city lights had turned his penthouse into a cage of glass and reflection, but nothing bloomed. He didn't know where she'd gone. She hadn't blocked him, hadn't erased herself from his world. She had simply stepped out of it, quietly, like smoke from a candle flame, and that was the cruelest part. There was no anger, no drama, no end he could argue with. Just love turned into absence. It wasn't until the morning of the company's 10-year anniversary gala that things began to shift. The event was going to be massive. Press, investors, clients, executives from all over the world. Caius hadn't wanted it. His assistant had insisted. Appearances had to be kept. Momentum had to be shown. And though Caius usually didn't care for public theater, this time he needed it. Not for his legacy, but for the distraction. He stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his cufflinks, watching his reflection with tired eyes. His suit was black, custom, flawless. His expression was unreadable. For a moment, he imagined what she would say if she were here. Probably something like, "You look like someone who charges too much for air." She would grin, tug his tie loose, and then kiss the corner of his mouth like it was the only place that mattered. His chest tightened, and for a moment he had to close his eyes. Then he buttoned his jacket, smoothed his collar, and walked into the chaos of the night. The venue was exquisite. Gold chandeliers, live jazz band, a sea of elegant guests sipping champagne and pretending they didn't watch every move he made. Speeches were given, awards announced, a montage of the company's growth played across a massive LED screen. And Caius, as always, stood at the center of it, tall and still and untouchable. Until he wasn't. He saw her just before the final toast. At first, he thought he'd imagined her, his grief conjuring her out of desperation. But then the crowd shifted, and there she was. Thalia. She stood near the far wall, not dressed in silk or glittering jewels, but in a simple dark blue gown, her hair down in loose waves, her eyes locked on his like they'd never looked away. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't crying. She was just there, present, real. Caius didn't excuse himself. He didn't wait for the applause to die. He walked straight across the ballroom, past startled guests and whispered gasps, and stopped in front of her like a man who had been crawling for miles and had finally found air. "You came," he said, voice low and hoarse. She nodded, swallowing. "I shouldn't have stayed away this long." "Why did you?" he asked, not accusing, just aching. "Because I thought I had to protect you. From the noise. From the mess I bring." Her voice trembled. "But then I realized, I don't make your life harder. I make it real." He exhaled like he hadn't breathed in weeks. "It hasn't been real without you." She looked down for a moment, then back up. "I've been working," she said, "drawing, quiet commissions, and one of them is something I wanted to show you." She pulled a rolled sketch from her clutch and handed it to him. He opened it slowly, fingers careful, reverent. It was a drawing of the rooftop garden, but not how it looked now. It was blooming, alive, daisies everywhere. The pot where he'd buried her flower bursting with color, and in the middle of the frame stood a man and a woman facing each other, hands joined, heads bent close like they were telling each other something the world would never hear. He looked at her, his throat tightening. "This is what you see." "This is what I hope for," she said. "And I want to come back, if you'll still have me." He didn't answer with words. He stepped forward, cupped her face with both hands, and kissed her. Deeply, desperately, like a man reclaiming not just the love he lost, but the version of himself he thought had died with it. She kissed him back, and around them the party faded into meaningless noise. Later that night, they returned to the rooftop garden. The air was warm, the city pulsing quietly below them. She knelt down by the pot with the buried daisies, brushed away a layer of dirt with her fingertips, and laughed softly. Tiny green shoots were pushing through the soil. "They waited," she whispered. "So did I," he said, kneeling beside her. He wrapped his arm around her, pulled her close, and together they watched the flowers rise toward the sky. Two people who had once met in an elevator as strangers, now planted deep in each other's lives, growing something that could never be undone.